Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater, and today is absolutely no exception as we're joined by the fantastic David Diggs to talk all about the second season of Snowpiercer. And the first thing I wanted to ask you was, when you were going into season one and constructing who Leighton was going to be, obviously there were a lot of elements of really deconstructing the scripts and doing research elements around different aspects of who he was as a character, and was really interested in what that looked like coming back for season two, especially because you didn't just come back into season two once. You started filming before the shutdown and then you had to kind of go back into it again. So what did that preparation process look like and how did it differ going into season two both times?
That's a great question. I mean, season two was easier in a lot of ways. In that, like, there's a sort of muscle memory, like you wear the character like more naturally. So it didn't take very much to kind of drop back into him. Um, and yeah, we had sort of just enough of a break to miss each other, So it was great. It was great to see everybody again, um, and I think just knowing the flow of things, we were very fortunate that most of our crew was able to come back as well. So really, like, the whole family was there, and that was really nice. Um, and yeah, it's just there's just more of a groove, I think, for a second season. So it doesn't feel as much like a not quite as much of a grind, at least in terms of trying to discover who you are and everything.
Yeah. Did you find that there was a different type of collaboration with Graham, who's the showrunner, and the writing team in terms of the way that they were crafting out your character this season and kind of looking to you for feedback? Because obviously you know him so intrinsically and how he responds to situations. And also at this point, they've really seen your strengths as an actor and the places that you can push him to.
Yeah, I think there's a really great. I mean, my favorite thing about television is the relationship between writers and actors, because it is a living. It evolves and it keeps evolving, and it's in this weird feedback loop that's happening in real time. So I love that. But yeah, and I, I think also TNT has information about what people like to see Leighton do, or any of the characters do. So the show starts writing into those things, um, and yeah, it's just fun. There's a lot more of a foundation to build on, so it's a little less of a grind, a little more experimentation in some ways, because you have this base. So you can
Mhm.
you can say things like, "Oh, I'd love it if Leighton would do this crazy thing," and then we can make it happen because we know who Leighton is enough to figure out how he would do that.
Yeah. Was there also a different type of experimentation when you were working on individual scenes? Because again, at this point, as well as knowing your character, you really understand his interpersonal relationships with all of the different passengers as well, from getting to play those out.
Yeah, yeah, I think the sort of freedom that we feel to hang out as a cast, like,
Yeah.
in front of the camera, is really wonderful. This It's such a great group of actors, and, like, nobody's afraid to play around or to try new things, or to adapt in the moment if something doesn't feel right. So that was really, yeah. It's just, overall, I think season twos are a little bit more of a good time.
One of the things that I always enjoy watching in terms of him as a character is him kind of gradually finding his voice as a leader within the train. And coming into the second season, it's not just the tail end. It's, he is kind of a voice that has a certain authority that just when he talks, everybody listens. And I think even just like the approach that you take with like what his tone of voice is and how he talks to everybody just kind of shuts up and listens to him, even if they haven't been interacting with him throughout these 7 years. And this is the first time that they're essentially getting to meet him. So, how did you think about what that delivery was going to be and how he's gradually finding a little bit more confidence? Because obviously, as a homicide detective before the train, he spent his whole life kind of just blending into the background and observing instead.
Yeah, that's a cool observation. I do think Leighton, yeah, has to kind of drastically change his approach to things, because his career was based on hiding in plain sight, really, before before this, and now he's a politician. He's a leader of the train, and um, has to sort of rally hearts and minds to his side, and to get everybody to buy into the experiment that is Snowpiercer. So he does have to to find his voice, um, and I think it's interesting just doing it. The naturally, like, the tone of my voice, of the character's voice, changes so much just because of the different situations he's put in, because there's so much more talking. He does so much more talking in season 2, that and those kinds of things physically change the way that your voice sounds. When you use your voice more, it's more warmed up, it's more resonant. And in season 1, I would come into these scenes and, like, say 3 or 4 things, and I'm probably just had my ass whooped by a bunch of guards or whatever. So, like, he's always covered in blood and whispering. And then season 2 is constantly making speeches, so there's a natural shift in tonality that I think is honest to the situation. Making speeches is very different than keeping secrets.
Yeah. One of the other aspects that's been really interesting to watch is obviously, again, kind of coming from that detective background that he has in, particularly in the first season, the fact that he was investigating a murder on the train. And that's when we first met him, that a lot of interactions are very much, he's sizing everybody up. He's really kind of observational, and you bring that into your performance, just the way that you look at characters, the way that you listen to them through your performance. But then, kind of like once that passed, and again, he's allowed a little bit more away from holding it into his chest so tightly. Has that kind of shifted a little bit of the dynamic in the way that you approach other characters and the way that you listen to them? Again, even just to the point that you were making about how, like, he talks a lot more versus just sitting back and listening as much.
Yeah, I think I think he is still very observant, but there's the new set of responsibilities sort of make him start to miss things more, or to not be as thoughtful and cautious as he would have been. I think being responsible for the survival of a whole bunch of people is a weight that Leighton hadn't really considered. He was trying to lead a revolution, but he wasn't necessarily trying to lead a country, a world, right? So he was just trying to get a better life for everybody in the tale. But this great weight has sort of fallen on him, and it's a lot. There's a lot more bureaucracy than he ever expected to have to deal with in his life. And so yeah, season 2 for Leighton is a lot about trying to navigate this this new position that was never really a goal of his.
Yeah. I also think it's so fun to and interesting to watch him as he gradually makes his way further up the train, because we now have reached the point with this season where we're seeing him in first class, and the way that you kind of move into that space is really interesting to watch, because he's very clearly uncomfortable. It's outside of his comfort zone. He's spent 7 years at the back of the train in a space that he knows intricately, and now he's in this whole different area. So how did you kind of approach the way that you walk into those spaces, and the way that, even just in terms of the blocking of the scene, you're kind of almost very much standing at the edge a lot. Again, just kind of like going back to that standing back and looking and surveying the situation before stepping into it.
Yeah, I had a relative of mine who spent 17 years incarcerated, and when he came out, he never stood in the middle of a room ever. He always had his back to one of the walls so he could see the whole room. And I thought about that a little bit. Coming out of being locked in the tail is a little bit like being locked up for 7 years. And like, life is dangerous and hard back there. And so he has kind of a natural alertness, particularly around people who he doesn't know or trust. And I think that's the real thing about the front of the train, is he doesn't really know these people. And so I tried to, whenever possible, these are small spaces, it's hard to not have your back to a wall. But for Leighton, I did try to make him pretty aware of the space, and making sure that he had a good vantage point.
Yeah. Did you also find yourself thinking about the light and the way that he kind of like looks towards it and interacts with it as well? Because the other thing about being in the tail for 7 years is that he literally hasn't seen daylight until he makes his way further up the train as well.
Yeah, I think we had to make that adjustment pretty quick, because otherwise I'd have been squinting the whole season. But I think the way that that ends up playing in the show is really a tribute to the
Mhm.
to our lighting department, and directorial choices to kind of play with this shadow,
Mhm.
um, when Leighton is around.
Yeah. It also seems like one of the challenges with the fact that the show is taking place in these kind of like multiple confined spaces must be thinking about how to continue utilizing these spaces and making them feel fresh and invigorating and exciting. So kind of what does that look like in terms of how you and the rest of the cast and the directors come in and think about what the movement of a scene's going to be so that you can still kind of keep discovering these spaces, even though now at this point we've seen them very extensively for a season.
Yeah, I think what we've discovered is that movement is a very important thing. It's and
Mhm.
kind of a difficult thing to manufacture because the train is moving the whole time, and if scenes are too stationary too often, you really lose that sense. And so, um, yeah, one of the lessons that it feels like we collectively as a cast and crew learned is that the more sort of movement either in the camera blocking or in our blocking, the more you buy that you're on a train. um so I think we're all a little more conscious of that. um
Mhm.
yeah, and then also the they keep building new sets. There keep being more and more train cars. So I am always genuinely surprised. It's not hard to keep things fresh when there's just constantly new things.
Yeah. It's also really fun to watch the way that you kind of find the small moments and what those moments of joy and new experience are going to be. I know everyone really cottoned on to the moment where you ate the grilled cheese sandwich in the first season, but kind of how did you approach this season and continuing to find, okay, what are going to be these really small, quiet moments that are going to say so much about my character, especially when he's experiencing something for the first time in so long that as an audience member, you might not think of straight away?
um, I think I don't know. I think I just try to take every moment as it comes.
Mhm.
And figure out where Leighton is in his journey and how much time or brain space he has to devote to this thing.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's such an action-filled show. There's and plot-filled. There's so many events. Um, so many things happen in every episode. So any moment of stillness, not in the sense of holding still necessarily, but just of reflection over something that is not the barreling forward of this train and like all of the many wars we are constantly fighting on it is, I find really useful just as a human being also to sort of remember that all life is still happening, and that includes small things.
Yeah. Because you were just mentioning the action of the show, I wanted to talk a little bit about the stunt work that you do and kind of that collaboration with the stunt team, especially because with the first season, you were saying how you were actually kind of almost taken aback and a little surprised at how you found yourself kind of overthinking those scenes and feeling a little bit nervous going into those. Did you find yourself becoming more comfortable with a lot of the stunt work and especially kind of like working with the team for so long now and kind of knowing how to approach those, how to choreograph them, how to block them, and still kind of bring your character to the foreground in those moments?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I love the stunt work. It is really fun. Yeah, my knees aren't built for it anymore, but I do as much of it as possible. And it's a great stunt team. And I think uh they are so aware also of the character dynamics at play.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of storytelling that happens in that action, and
Mhm.
it's a real tribute to them for recognizing the kind of necessary power positions and what those are saying about the the characters in relationship to the story and stuff, and giving us things that look really cool to do,
Mhm.
but that also tell story. So yeah, I think now being over sort of the initial shock of it and getting to understand it as a function of storytelling has made it a little
Mhm.
bit easier to wrap my mind around. And I've always loved doing the actual stunts. I think it's very cool. So
Yeah. And you've worked so extensively across television, but this is kind of the first time that you're, leading a show in this way. And I thought it was really interesting when you talked about season 1, the way in which you described it being a little bit of a journey to kind of learn and understand what you can take home with you at night in terms of the work that you're doing and the character that you're playing, particularly with a project like this and the type of situation that you're having to live within throughout the entire day. Did you find that that was a journey that you were continuing as you were working on the second season of it, that you were still kind of figuring out what that balance is of how much you need to retain at the end of the day and keep within you to be able to show up the next day and keep doing the work in the same way, but also kind of at the same time balancing that with letting it go and being able to switch it off for yourself?
I might have overcorrected for season 2. I might have I might have not taken enough home with me. I think sometimes I would show up on set and be like, what's happening today? I don't yeah, I got very good at letting it go when I left. So yeah, we'll see with season 3. I'm still, it is still an experiment, I think, for me. But it is, I think, you know, you're we shoot in Vancouver. I don't live in Vancouver, but I'm there for so long. You spend so much of your time living in a place that's not where you live
Mhm.
necessarily, uh, that it is a part of it, I think, has to become just like a job, and you have to sort of be able to live your life in the place where you are, and have experiences outside of the job, even though you're there for so many hours. I think so. Finding I brought my dog up with me last season, and that was really helpful. That was really helpful just because it forced me to get out and walk around with him, and not yeah, it forces me to have time that's not the job and exist in the world.
Mhm.
Vancouver's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
uh my dog made me get out and see it.
And I know that between filming a couple of the things that you were doing in the first season was still kind of like diving into shows like rewatching Columbo episodes and thinking about how you could pull that into your character, but also creating a makeshift studio in the place that you were staying to still be able to write and perform music and to have that separate creative outlet. Were those kind of tactics that you employed again, or were there other things that you found to kind of express yourself creatively and kind of look into for fun research tools that were also just a bit of escapism?
Definitely the music always is a constant, and I have to have a functional studio wherever I am. But the I was writing a lot. We're in production right now for this blind spotting TV show. So we actually, because I was up there, we had a little mini writer's room, and
Mhm.
I made them all come to Vancouver so we could write after I rapped every day. And so that, there are a lot of other creative outlets and writing. Yeah, I was writing a film with another friend of mine. So yeah, there were a bunch of things, other creative outlets that I think were useful, and
Mhm.
always everything you do informs the other thing. And so I don't believe in like wasted work or research. You know so Leighton got to be a more full person because David was experiencing all these other things.
Yeah. I'm so excited to see what the series ends up coming out and looking like for blind spotting, which you were just mentioning. And wanted to ask about that a little bit because I think there's such an interesting journey in taking a narrative structure that you've built out and constructed in one medium and then kind of deconstructing it and rebuilding it in another space. Because even just in terms of the way that you continue to tell that story and evolve it, requires different types of narrative beats and different arcs for a series than it does for a film. So what has that been like in terms of taking something that you developed and kind of taking it apart and then building it again in a completely different way?
Much like the film, we didn't know what we were doing, so we did every day we're learning so much more. So we sort of work with every tool we have in the toolbox up until every moment, and then we learn new information and have to adjust things. So I what's been really interesting for me is just the different ways that budget interacts with story on a constant basis in television. And I didn't understand that, despite, and I think this last year I've been doing a lot more producing also. So I've been learning this in that role as well. But we wrote all these scripts that everybody at the network signed off on and thought it was great. And then we started budgeting them out and realized it was impossible to do all of these things, right? So we had to rewrite with those constraints in mind and start thinking about, the number of locations on a day and all of these things. And so writing into a set of constraints, which I actually enjoy. But it's a very different process than creating a film and being like, this is essentially the film, so we need to figure out how to make this. Television is much more alive than that. You're revising all the time. So you say, we're gonna make this, and then somebody else says you can't make that, and then you go, okay, well then I'm gonna make this. And then they go, you can make half of that. And you're like, great, all right, well then what if I only make a fourth of that so I can do this other thing over here? It's like a weird barter system of art. But it's fun. It's definitely exhausting. It's definitely the most I've ever thought about something. It's a lot of work, but it's been really interesting.
I think it's so interesting that you just mentioned that you kind of liked having the constraints because, I love the way that you've described in the past how when you first started writing music and writing rap songs, that taking that from poetry and then having specific constraints about how that needed to be structured was also something that really helped you. Do you find that no matter what the medium is that you're working in, that you kind of respond creatively in a really great way to having limitations and constraints to have to work around?
Always, yeah, always. I find this even as an actor too. Some actors are and a lot of very great actors are, work in this way where they read the script and develop the character and then come in and start saying like, this is not this is not what's going to work for me. Like, I would never do this. This doesn't make sense. And I don't do so much of that. I do sometimes, like when it really sticks out to me, but normally I walk into a moment and go, okay, what do we have to do here? I have to make this person get from this moment to that moment, and here are the things that happen in between. Cool. Those are the constraints. I'm going to figure out how to do that. So yeah, it's that same thing. It's that same rapper sensibility. Like the constraint is the creative part.
Yeah. With Snowpiercer, what do you feel like the creative constraints have been for you on that show specifically?
I think obviously the space, but for me, it's always the events on that show. Like I said, there's just so many. And so I think which means that, and this is probably true of the world that it exists in, that relationship stuff has to happen very quickly. And I think under normal circumstances, you would develop these relationships slowly, or these emotional beats would take a lot longer, but they happen like that on Snowpiercer. And it's sometimes, so I think acclimating that can be, that's the major constraint challenge. Be like, okay, by the end of this scene, I have to really care about this person I've never met before, because at the end of the next scene, they're gonna die and I have to be sad about it, So those are the kind of gymnastics that you're doing.
Right. And with Snowpiercer time, it's like only 2 hours have passed and you've
only
seen 17 people die.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's dead. And
It's also, one of the interesting things about every single character on Snowpiercer, sorry, is the fact that every single one of the characters is dealing with a sense of grief and loss that they
Mhm.
carry with them. And, I feel like in your portrayal of Leighton, you carry it on an emotional level. You kind of almost feel the physical weight on his shoulders that he's carrying with him throughout that time as well. How do you kind of find those specific beats in the way that, even when it's not written in the script, that you still kind of carry that through in the quieter moments and in between the lines of dialogue for yourself?
Leaning on the environment and the wardrobe helps a lot.
Mhm,
Honestly, he's always wearing these heavy coats.
mhm,
There is always a fair, and I have a ton of wig on my head. Like there is actually a weight, like a physical weight to Leighton that is different than my own, which is good. It's really useful. I prefer not acting when I can help it, right? So if something just is, that's it's much better because I don't have to think about it. So that weight comes naturally, I think. And what's true in season two a lot also is that he's exhausted.
mhm,
Um, there hasn't really been a moment to sit down post this crazy, bloody,
mhm,
violent revolution, and just everything starts right back up again. So I tried to, and things aren't as new anymore. So I
mhm.
tried to find that kind of exhaustion. And add that into him, and which is honestly not difficult when you're working on a TV show. You're always tired, so again, like the less acting, the better.
Yeah. And Leighton's relationship with Melanie, which is Jennifer Connelly's character, has kind of shifted and evolved. So, it feel like it kind of completely flipped itself on its head the last couple of seasons of the first season, and feels like it's going to continue to go into completely different spaces and realms. Did the two of you kind of find yourself having different conversations? Because it's the fun aspect of it is that there's always an adversarial aspect. They're always sizing each other up, but at the same time, there's still always an undertone of respect because they understand each other. And particularly with Leighton at this point in this season, he's starting to understand why she's made a lot of the choices that she has, where at first he was just kind of pushing against it. And now he's having to start to make similar types of choices for himself as well.
Yeah, it is not difficult to respect Jennifer Connelly. She's very very good. So I think um, yeah, that relationship, I think it was, she's also so like she's a really good person, and so it was, I am glad that their relationship is becoming less adversarial, because that was sort of the harder part for me to play sometimes, because I'm so in awe of her, and the way that she works,
Mhm.
so it's been nice to be walking towards something where Leighton just gets to openly respect her, because again, that's less acting.
Just you showing up and going, everything's amazing. In terms of
Yeah.
that, I mean, when you're working with someone that just brings that caliber of skill to every single thing that they do and the way that they approach everything, do you find that it also really elevates the work that you're able to do within scenes together? And what is the way in which you feel like she brings out the strongest side of you as an actor?
I hope it elevates me. Otherwise, I'm leaving her with a terrible scene partner. But I think um, she's a very focused actor, and yeah, as soon as she walks into a scene, she's aware of all of the stakes. She is aware of all of the story things, and she's managed to already synthesize. It takes me a few takes, I think, to um, kind of find the moment. But she's from take one is already all has always already synthesized all of the
Mhm,
information, and it allows her to play in this very subtle world, because everything she does reads as correct. There aren't any choices that are wrong choices, because she's done all the work, um, and so yeah, I think it. What's nice about working with her is that um, the moments get to be very grounded. She insists on it in some ways, just
mhm.
her the nature of her performance. Um, if you try to do too much, she's going to sort of act circles around you by just, moving her eyes or something. So, yeah, it forces things into a really natural space, and a space that is just focused and grounded and still sometimes, which, yeah, anyway, it's great. But every actor on this show is like that. Allison Wright is like she can do anything. And she can come in and take a scene in any direction. And I always want to be like that. Every time I'm in a scene with her, I'm like, I want to be able to do what you can do. Um, everybody, Steve Ogg, Mickey Sumner, like this cast is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask about your relationship with performing and creativity over the last several months, because one of the things that you were kind of talking about and discussing in the first few months into quarantine was how, obviously there were a lot of opportunities to still be creative and to be writing, developing projects, but the difference was not getting to perform in any way, which obviously is so much of what you do across music, theater, film, television. And, I think especially when we do jobs that require so much of us, and you really have to kind of give everything to, there's an identity association that comes with that. So has that made you think differently about, your identity as a performer and kind of what that means to you just in the day to day, going through a period of time where you weren't able to be doing that?
That's really interesting. Yeah, I've been thinking about identity a lot, actually, in a lot of phases of my life, and thinking that this idea of identifying as anything maybe is not as useful as I found it before. That there that implies a series of a bunch of constraints, which there you go. But it implies identifying as a performer implies that if I am not performing, I am not a performer, and therefore somehow not living up to this ideal that I've set up for myself. And maybe that's not useful, particularly in a quarantine, but maybe in general. And maybe there's a shift that I'm trying to make to just being a person who does things, and not focusing on the ways in which I don't meet the standard of the thing that I decided on anyway, right? Because I don't know that it helps me reach. It's not like I could go perform more. Anyway, is getting this like talk I've been having with my therapist, but it's but it is in there. I wonder about I have this quarantine has made me sort of the shutdown has made me think about a lot of things like that, about what is the standard that you're holding yourself to. Is it useful? Is it making you a better person? Or is it just making you frustrated?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a conversation that a lot of creatives are having, especially, and I'm sure across other industries. And, thank you so much for diving into talking with us about Snowpiercer. I can't wait to watch the rest of the second season. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you. Good talking to you again.